Hi, for today's session, we will talk about assessments. Things that we have to avoid as teachers is to be fortune tellers in terms of assessing and grading our students. This means that as teachers, we should give them concrete feedback as well as information of whether they are demonstrating a desired or expected learning outcome as well as the gap that's needed to be filled in terms of their current standing with respect to the identified learning outcome. There are different types of assessment that we can do to uh, assess whether our students or learners are achieving our desired learning outcome. We have the authentic assessment and the traditional assessment or the classroom test. The classroom tests are teacher-made tests which makes use of the paper and pencil test. Example of this traditional assessment uh, are the selected response type and the constructed response type. Under selected response type, we have the alternate response like true or false. We also have this one, which provides four options to the students, but these options are the same all throughout this section of the test. Again, this is still part of the alternate response because students have just limited options in terms of how will they respond to the question. We also have the multiple choice type of test, wherein choices varies on each question on this section of the test. And of course, uh, we have the completion, which is, or the short answer, which is already a constructed response type of test, and the completion, which requires learner to complete a statement by supplying the needed information. This one is also a form of a completion type of test, wherein students are asked to complete the information on a particular table. In constructing traditional tests, there are some technical rules that we have to follow. For example, this type of test is erroneous as the instruction is uh, meant to confuse the students. As much as possible, the instruction should be brief enough but complete enough and straightforward enough to be understood by the students. Likewise, we usually set first the premise of the questions or the test before putting a blank. The first thing that students should read is the premise or the question itself and not the blank. In terms of essay should be provided a clear instruction of how and what expected answer is required from the students. Likewise, we should set proper criteria in grading essays and make sure that the criteria is still aligned with the learning outcome. It is also imperative that science teachers be cautious in terms of the criteria, as there are some criteria that might not be within the scope of specialization. For example, grammar might not be something that a science teacher should grade because first and foremost, the science teacher is not the English or language teacher. It's not also correct to just indicate the number of points in an essay type of test, but rather a criteria on what each point would mean should be communicated to the students who will answer the test. In terms of completion, there should only one blank on a statement that the student needs to answer. Likewise, we should avoid clues or hanging clues that would make the answer obvious. We should also avoid vague statements that has multiple answers. Even the use of a and an should be avoided because it would hint students a clue. Again, the first thing that students should read is the premise or the stem of the question and not the blank. In an alternate response like true or false, we should avoid disputable statements that has not been proven absolutely right. Likewise, we should avoid very long statements on a true or false. On this example number 3, second principle of education could mean many things. So again, let's avoid vague statements on a true or false. We should also avoid the use of words like frequently and generally because it would raise doubt on whether the statement is absolutely true or not. We should also avoid directly lifted statement from the textbook as it does not assess if students have understand the idea, but rather it could only mean that the student have memorized what was written in the textbook. We should also avoid to use the word not because we do not want to confuse the statement. Okay, the same goes with the word some, as it would raise doubt on whether the statement is really true or not. In terms of matching type, all options on a column should be similar to one another. If the option should be name of persons, therefore there should be no date on the options. Likewise, we should not put completion as the stem of the question on matching type. In terms of organization in matching type, the one that should be put on the left side should be the stem of the question so that the student would just have to read the option, or so that the student would have shorter time to read the options. In terms of multiple choice quiz, all choices in an MCQ test should be parallel in terms of how they are stated. For these examples, we can see that one option is different from the rest. This would signal the student that this would be the correct answer. Likewise, the stem of a multiple choice quiz should not start with a blank. A multiple choice quiz stem could be a straightforward question or a completion. We should also avoid the use of a or an, which could be a hint for the correct answer. As much as possible, the length of the option should be equal with one another. In terms of problem solving, we should be definite on what we are looking for. Likewise, we should avoid vague statement without a direct question. Way of how the problem solving test would be graded should be communicated as well to the student. In terms of the grading system in Basic Ed, during 2012 to 2015, KPUP was used in terms of the assessment scheme. KPUP is composed of knowledge, process, understanding, and product. These are the level of assessment at the same time the component of assessment in Basic Ed for the year 2012 to 2015. Knowledge type of assessment are those assessment which requires a single correct answer, while process assessment are those assessment which requires learners to carry out a particular process like classification, comparing, computation, or application to answer a particular test. Understanding type of assessment requires learners to use any or combination of the facets of understanding, while product requires learner to produce an output or demonstrate a particular performance, like a performance task. This is an example of a knowledge test using KPUP, which only requires one answer. This one is also a knowledge test. This one would require student to do computation, so therefore it's a process assessment test. This one requires students to carry out a process of making a diagram by organizing thoughts, so this is also a process test. This one does not only ask students to identify, but rather to reason out for their answer, so therefore this is an understanding type of test. The same for this one, as it requires students to explain his or her thoughts on the diagram being shown. This one is also a process test, as it requires students to carry out a particular process to answer the test. In 2015 up to the present, the assessment scheme in the Basic Ed changed, wherein it was simplified into the components of written work, performance tasks, and quarterly assessment. But then again, the KPUP is still embedded in this assessment component. It can be noticed that there is a great emphasis already in terms of the performance task, as this serves as a culmination of particular topic or unit and targets part or whole learning outcomes of the subject. In terms of making an assessment question for traditional type of tests, there are level of questioning that we can use based on the Bloom's taxonomy. We classify a question as an easy question if it only requires remembering or for students to remember concepts. If the question would require students to demonstrate their comprehension or to apply whatever they have learned, that is classified already as an average question. If the question would require students to use two or more of analyzing, evaluating, and creating process, therefore it is already classified as a difficult question. For example, okay, this one is not a correct way of making a multiple choice type of test because it has no stem. The only stem it has is the word hypothesis. To revise it, we can have it like this. This is the stem. The educated guess in scientific method is blank. That's the stem of the multiple choice quiz. And the options are the four. So this is an easy question because it only requires students to remember concepts. This one is an average question because it requires students to comprehend the concept of composting before they can classify which of this option really demonstrates the process of composting. This one is also an example of an average question because it only requires classification to be answered. This one is already a difficult question because it requires students to first analyze the option and then compare it to the stem or the description being stated on the stem of the question. Again, this one is also a difficult question because it sets premise that should be analyzed first before the answer can be counter-checked on the options. This is also an example of a difficult question which requires students to analyze the examples in the column at the same time to evaluate the options that would suit the example in the column. This one is an average question because it requires students to just demonstrate a comprehension and to classify the example being shown. However, we would notice that seemingly this type of test is not suitable for the learning competency. The learning competency states that learners should be able to describe the movements of objects such as fast, slow, forward, backward, stretching, and compressive, while the options here really describe the movement of object. The process carried out by the learner in answering this question is not really of the process of describing, but rather of choosing the answer. So, it means that traditional assessment are very limited in terms of the learning competency it can measure because most of the learning competency would require students to demonstrate particular behavior cognitively. They should be doing instead what we call authentic assessment like performance tasks. I hope this session of the teaching of science have helped you understand assessment. Thank you and good day.